It's easy to think of racing as a battle of engines and horsepower, but sometimes history turns on something far smaller, a single gear. In the early days of American motorsport, racers obsessed over cubic inches and compression ratios, but few realized how much untapped potential was hiding in the transmission. A small change in the rear-end gear ratio, just a few teeth on a ring and pinion, would go on to redefine the way cars launched, accelerated, and ultimately, how championships were won. To understand how that happened, we have to rewind to the 1950s and 60s, when the drag strips and dirt ovals of America became the laboratories for mechanical innovation. Back then, racers didn't have access to computer models or wind tunnels. What they had were wrenches, intuition, and a deep feel for how a car responded to each tweak.
Carburetor to match the
Changing
flow.
the gear ratio wasn't glamorous, but it could turn a mid-pack car into a record setter overnight. When engineers and mechanics began experimenting with shorter ratios, meaning the drive shaft turned the wheels more times per engine revolution, they found a simple truth. Acceleration beats top speed in short sprints. On paper, this meant sacrificing a few miles per hour at the end of the straight, but in practice, it meant cars leapt off the line like slingshots, crushing the competition before the halfway point. The difference was immediately noticeable. At drag strips across the country, weekend racers began swapping gears in their garage on Friday nights, chasing that perfect combination of launch power and engine efficiency. By the early 1960s, even factory teams were paying attention. Chevrolet, Ford, and Chrysler engineers started offering performance gear sets through dealer networks, realizing that enthusiasts were more than willing to spend extra for a few tenths shaved off their quarter-mile times. The term rear-end ratio entered the vocabulary of every gearhead in America, and soon it became a symbol of underground mechanical knowledge, the kind of thing only real racers understood. One of the first to truly weaponize gearing was Smokey Yunick, a legendary mechanic and NASCAR innovator. He realized that a small change in gear ratio could transform how an engine delivered its power to the pavement, especially when paired with cam timing and tire size. Smokey wasn't just playing with numbers, he was rewriting the physics of how race cars behaved. By experimenting with final drive ratios, he allowed his cars to stay in their power band longer through each corner, giving drivers an edge that was invisible to spectators, but devastating to rivals. It was an insight that bridged the line between engineering and art. His rivals took note, and soon every top-level team in NASCAR was calculating and recalculating gear sets before every race. The old idea of one-size-fits-all gearing was gone forever. Meanwhile, in drag racing, the rear-end ratio war was exploding. Hot rodders discovered that a swap from a 3.55 to a 4.11 gear could make the difference between a win and a second-place finish. It wasn't just about torque, it was about rhythm. The right gear change aligned the engine's peak horsepower with the length of the track, creating a perfect marriage of timing and traction. As drivers fine-tuned their setups, stories spread of racers who gained a full car-length advantage just by changing gears. The NHRA took notice too. In some classes, rules were rewritten to prevent extreme gear combinations that gave unfair advantages. That's how powerful this simple change had become. It was altering the balance of entire racing leagues. By the 1970s, gearing strategy had evolved into a science. The introduction of limited slip differentials, lightweight ring gears, and quick-change rear ends allowed racers to swap ratios in minutes. Dirt track drivers could adjust their cars between heats depending on track moisture or banking angle. Drag racers could tailor their setup for weather and elevation. Suddenly, gearing wasn't a hidden trick. It was a fundamental part of competitive racing. Engineers began developing calculators and charts to predict optimal ratios based on tire size, torque curve, and aerodynamic drag. What started as backyard tinkering had matured into a field of data-driven precision. The ripple effect didn't stop there. Even street performance cars benefited. American muscle legends like the Camaro, Mustang, and Challenger offered optional performance gearing straight from the factory, letting everyday drivers taste the same mechanical advantage used by professionals. In the decades that followed, the philosophy of right gear, right race became embedded in racing culture. Transmission design grew more sophisticated, from 4 speeds to 5 speeds to today's seamless shift sequential gearboxes. But the core principle remains the same: matching engine output to track conditions. Formula One engineers now rely on complex simulations to design gear ratios that extract every ounce of performance within regulations. NASCAR teams still obsess over rear-end gearing before every track weekend. Even electric vehicles, which often have a single-speed gearbox, are now revisiting the idea of multiple gears to enhance acceleration and efficiency, proving that this 70-year-old insight still drives innovation. The simple act of changing a gear ratio continues to influence how machines perform, evolve, and win. Perhaps what makes this story so fascinating isn't just the mechanical genius, but the human element. Behind every breakthrough in racing, there's always a story of someone curious enough to ask, what if we changed this? That mindset, the willingness to experiment, is what keeps motorsport alive. The simple gear change wasn't really simple at all. It represented a deeper shift in how people understood performance, that small mechanical adjustments could yield enormous real-world results. Whether it was a dusty garage in the 50s or a high-tech racing lab today, that truth remains constant. Innovation doesn't always come from reinventing the engine. Sometimes it comes from turning the smallest part just a little differently. And the next time you hear the roar of a car tearing down a straightaway, remember, that sound, that speed, that power, it might just come down to one tiny decision hidden deep inside the transmission. Because in racing, as in life, the smallest changes can create the biggest victories.